Hello and welcome to Kain Company. My name is David Kain. I'm the president of Kain Automotive, and I'm really excited when a friend of mine is able to join me on the show. And today joining me is Shaun Kniffin, commonly known as Kniff to his buddies and to the industry, and he's the marketing director for the Germain Motor Company based out of Columbus, Ohio. So Kniff, welcome to Kain Company.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Good to see you.
So Kniff, through the power of technology, we're able to pick your brain and learn some things, but let's talk about the power of technology and how you all are leveraging that at the Germain Motor Company to connect with more people. And what happened in 2017 that you want to replicate in 2018? And what are some of the learnings that you have from 2017 that you might not necessarily want to pull forward into 2018?
Yeah, 17 was a year that we saw a lot of change, and we saw it coming later in 16 too, and we saw that flattening going on, and you know, when the business was flattening out for as much business as we were doing before, it almost felt like it was just a massive slowdown. So when the business flattens out, unfortunately, sometimes expenses don't follow that same track. So advertising is one of those things that we look at seriously and go, okay, what do we need to do differently now? And basically at the end of last year, what we started to do was we started to change our vocabulary about who we were working with and how we were working with them. But ultimately what I want to know is what we're doing changing the score. And you and I talked a little bit about that in Dallas at our Digital Marketing 20 group meeting about, you know, there's so many different companies out there, and we're in the process of really looking at those hard and saying, is this really necessary? It's sort of like what we learned from the crash in 08, 09. We learned to look at everything and say, do we really need this? Is it really making a difference? Is it really changing the score? And now as into 18, it'll better prepare us. We'll be leaner as we jump into the new year to look at the emerging technology that's coming, because digital retailing is knocking on our front door, and we're going to have to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, there's no question. And it's funny, I was going through the archives, and when you came to our event in November, you saw I showed a brief video of when we launched Ford Direct, and all the things you're hearing from all these companies that are all about the buy the car online, the digital retailing, is all the prognostications that we made as Ford dealers in 2000. And it's taken that long for the market to mature, for consumers to be accepting of it, and candidly for dealers to say that they trust this type of a retailing strategy. So let's talk about when you look at advanced retailing strategies. I've been reading about your all's Drive Germain strategy and stuff. How does that come into play, and how are you feeling about it?
Well, it is definitely an emerging market, if you will. It's not designed to basically replace the car buying experience. I think that we're going to have a lot of different conversations about it in the coming weeks and months. Yesterday was one of those days where we just had multiple meetings on multiple fronts about multiple verticals about how are we going to get this message out. And for example, one of the challenges that we have is we've been talking to some of the local business journals and the local newspaper. And the reason being is that we didn't want to take necessarily just a digital front on this. We feel like the audience for that type of automobile non-ownership, if you will, is something that they're going to hear about in a lifestyle article. They're going to hear about it in a tech magazine. They're going to hear about it in a business article. So we're actually doing some advertorials, if you will.
Wow.
And we're trying to reach the market in a very different way. In other words, we're trying to sort of be informational while at the same time we're not trying to advertise it. So, for example, we rejected the idea of being in the auto show. Our auto show is next month here in Columbus. And we're like, that's not our audience. Our audience are people that want a different way to use a vehicle. It's a lifestyle change. Yes. And typically, and as dynamic as the subscription services are going to be, the fleet is going to change. We haven't introduced the second and third tier fleets yet, So right now, it's just the idea of getting it in people's heads about, okay, this is different. This fits my lifestyle, and it's not necessarily about trying to secure ownership or a lease number on a vehicle. So it's a different mindset. It's definitely a paradigm shift. The cool thing about working with Drive Germain is that all of our brands will be represented in this. So if you want to drive a Highlander on one day and then move over to a BMW or an Infiniti Q60 or something like that, you can definitely do it. So it's so far it's been very successful. Our next thing is how do we grow it? So that presents challenges in itself.
What a cool idea, though, and not surprising. Germain is on the front of that edge, trying to lead into it as opposed to following behind. Another quick question I wanted to run past you is at our Digital Marketing Manager 20 group, which a lot of people are curious about that. We get emails from time to time. People say, how do you join? So we certainly want to welcome with open arms anyone who's got a penchant for getting together and learning new stuff. We do that 3 times a year. But one of the outcomes of that meeting came from the gentleman with the Hazelwood Auto Group out in the Bremerton, Washington area. And he was talking about the expansion of vendors. And you kind of alluded to that. And the group itself, when we first organized, we had over 100, and we're going through a refreshing project right now to see how many vendors everybody actually uses. So one thing that he uses, I thought was really clever. He messaged all of their vendors and said, I need a 1-page summary of what you all actually do for us. And you can imagine dealerships over a span of 3 or 4 or 5 years starts to accumulate a lot of expenses, but they sometimes don't revisit them and they just keep writing checks. So any thoughts or any opinion on that strategy and the fact that Germain really looks at vendors not as vendors but as true partners?
Yeah, the partner list is where we like to eventually move the relationship with our vendors, and sometimes it gets there pretty quickly, and sometimes it takes a while. There's a trust factor. There's some, can you jump through hoops? I know that we have one particular vendor right now who was at the Kain conference, and we had a store sign up, and they went through a little bit of a bubble last month, a bump in the road, if you will, and the vendor quickly fixed the problem and then sort of made good on his promises. So that's what we like to see. But, when Shaun was talking about that vendor list and what he was doing, it's a great idea if you're not really intimate with who it is that you're working with. Yeah. I know we went through that exercise back in Atlanta in 2015, and we had over 100, and our list is close to 100 with the number of stores we have, and we're not alone in that. And I think, in the words of our COO, John Melchenko, it's not necessarily who or what anymore. It's really about how, and that is, how do we work with them?
Kniff, I really want to thank you for joining us today. We'll obviously throughout the year like to have you back on because it is fun to keep track of new strategies like Drive Germain, and I do appreciate the audience joining us today. So thank you very much, Kniff, for joining us there from Columbus, Ohio at the headquarters of Germain Motor Company, and I'll see you down the road real soon. And for the viewers, we look forward to seeing you again here next week on Kain & Company.